The coronavirus pandemic continues to cripple the airline industry. Just this morning, several of the country's top airline CEOs visited the White House in an effort to push for added relief for the airline industry. Back in March, the Trump administration signed the CARES Act, which included the Payroll Support Program for airlines across the U.S. In addition, it prohibited airlines from terminating any employees through October 1st. Now, as that deadline quickly approaches, airlines are saying they will be unable to keep their employees without additional support from the government.
We airline CEOs are here on behalf of the people that work for us who are doing great jobs out there, taking care of keeping our country moving when our country's largely paralyzed with fear. They're out there putting their uniforms on, going to work every day and making sure we're moving. And without action, they're going to be furloughed on October 1st, and it's not fair. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to our country.
And CBS News transportation correspondent Kris Van Cleave joins me now from Washington, D.C. Hi, Kris. Great to see you. So the coronavirus pandemic has, of course, crippled the airline industry. But tell us exactly what kind of additional aid these airlines are hoping to get from the federal government.
The airlines are asking for basically a clean extension of the payroll protection program that was part of the CARES Act. That was $25 billion that basically flowed through the airlines and went straight to the employees. It basically covered about 70% of their payroll for the last 6 months. That's set to expire at the end of the month. As part of that deal, the airlines surrendered some equity to the federal government. The government could take a stake in the airlines. They also agreed not to reduce service or to lay anyone off. If that all ends September 30th, and the airlines have already warned in many cases that thousands of people will be furloughed. That includes at American Airlines. You have Doug Parker's letter to the Trump administration up. He and all of the union officials at American Airlines signed this letter. It's very rare where you have airline management and the unions lockstep together on something. But on this one, they agree that an extension of the payroll protection plan buys them time and keeps their employees working. It also gives them the opportunity that if things have gotten better by the end of March, they can more quickly ramp back up service. If people have been furloughed, it will slow down the ability to recover.
So if American Airlines doesn't get the funding it's asking for, can you tell us a little bit more specifically about what exactly it would mean for the company? Are they giving a number to how many jobs would be impacted?
Sure. So American Airlines, the world's largest airline, has about 140,000 employees at the start of all of this. They expect to be 30% smaller. They will have fewer than 100,000 employees on the payroll October 1. And that breaks down as about 12,500 have taken voluntary departures. They took early retirement or some sort of an exit package. They expect to furlough or lay off 19,000. That's 17,500 furloughs and 1,500 involuntary separations on the management side. There's another 11,000 employees that have agreed to take unpaid leave. So it is a substantial downsizing of that airline because of the downturn here. And when you look at the numbers, air travel is down around 65–70%. So you've seen the industry, this business, their revenue plummet. And yet they have stayed the same size. There's now an effort to try to right-size the operation with the fact that they're running at 25 to 35% the revenue that they had a year ago.
Right. And to your point, American Airlines lost over $2 billion in revenue in the first quarter alone. As you just mentioned, the entire industry continues to hemorrhage money as this pandemic continues. So, even with this additional federal funding, even if they get what they're asking for, the extension of the CARES Act, how do the airlines plan to fix these ongoing issues? Because it could be an indication of the entire travel industry shrinking for the foreseeable future. I mean, there's no, vaccine in sight. There's no guarantee that even after this next extension, people are going to go back to traveling the way they were at pre-pandemic levels.
So while there does appear to be bipartisan support for extending the payroll protection program, there just is no coronavirus relief package to move it through Congress. There are critics, and they make that point. The airlines are talking about the potential of 4 years before you get things to recover back to 2019 levels. Well, there's no guarantee that at the end of March that these folks don't get laid off, or some portion of them don't get laid off. What it does do is buy the airlines time. It buys them time to better understand what the landscape will look like over a continuing basis. It buys them time to find ways to cut costs and bring their cash burn down to zero. In the second quarter, airlines burned through about $11 billion in cash. Those are huge financial losses. So that's not sustainable. This is a move to buy time and to keep people employed. You know, the airline industry here on October 1st could see as many as 76,000 people suddenly, like that, no longer have a job. The commercial aviation industry touches, directly or indirectly supports about 10.4 million U.S. jobs. That's 1 in every 14 jobs or so. So when you cut out 30% of an airline, that's going to ripple through the economy. So there are some macroeconomic arguments for keeping them employed, but the bottom line, airlines don't expect demand to return to, the levels we were seeing, the levels we were used to a year ago, 2 years ago, until there is a viable, widespread vaccine and or therapeutics for the coronavirus. So it is possible that what we're seeing is sort of this leveling out at 35% travel demand. It's probably not sustainable for years on end. The airlines have raised a ton of cash. Can they get through 12 months of this, 18 months of it? Probably. But it is likely that you're going to see carriers get smaller, certainly the big ones, the ones that rely on international travel in particular.
Has there ever been discussion turning the airline industry into sort of like the train industry, partially government subsidized going forward?
Don't think there'd be support for re-regulating the airline business. If you think back to 1978, the government deregulated the airline business. That was when the government set fares, decided who could fly where. Critics would argue very quickly that it would raise the cost of flying substantially, would limit options. So I don't think you're going to see a move, certainly under the Trump administration, to privatize, to publicize, to make the airlines a government-run entity. The government has the opportunity to take ownership stakes in any of the airlines that accept CARES Act, particularly the loans. But I don't think you're going to see much more of a push in that direction at this point. It may not be a very good investment for taxpayers either. I mean, if you look at, here's an industry that was flying high and now is battered, maybe not the best time to make an investment in the airline if you are trying to return value to the taxpayers.
Right, and looking at those international flights, of course, most countries still have bans in place preventing Americans from traveling internationally. How do airlines plan to account for losses on international flights? Is that all rolled into this ask?
So if you're United, American, or Delta, you really can't make up having 30 or 40% of your business, in some cases more, just shut off. Like they can't operate it. What they are doing, you're seeing airlines be very strategic. They're running a lot of cargo-only flights. They were surprised at how much money they could make just running cargo, even if they can't get passengers. So that recovers a fraction of the international business. If you are Southwest, JetBlue, Spirit, Frontier, some of the leisure carriers that didn't have a very heavy international or business flyer component, you're better positioned to weather this because people are still going to do what they call VFR flying, visiting family and relatives. But until business travel comes back, until international travel comes back, those big carriers are going to struggle. They rely on people buying those really expensive first-class seats on international flights for a good chunk of their business. And business travel is almost nil right now. International travel, almost zero right now. It is a very tough road ahead. So they're going to rely on living off of debt for a while. But if we're talking about no business travel 2 years from now, it's going to be an existential threat to the biggest carriers.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Kris Van Cleave, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.